A backpack, 2 letters, 1 spent shotgun shell, 225 milligrams of heroin, and a great band. Add them together and what do you get? One of the biggest suicide cover-ups that America has ever seen. On Friday, April 8th, 1994, Kurt Cobain, the legendary songwriter and singer from the band Nirvana, was found dead in his Seattle home's greenhouse. Police quickly deemed his death to be a suicide due to a fatal bullet wound to the head, a note explaining what he had done, and a shotgun lying next to it. However, if you look a little deeper into his final days and see what a few key people were doing in that time, you can only wonder, was it murder? Ugh. Before we get into why he didn't kill himself, we need to look at the last several days of Cobain's life. About 2 weeks before his death, Kurt's wife, Courtney Love, organized an intervention for him. She was concerned about Kurt's drug habits and really had every right to be. It was a well-known fact at the time that Kurt Cobain was using heroin as well as a few other narcotics pretty heavily. Kurt agreed to go to the facility, Exodus Rehab Center, even though it was all the way in California. On Wednesday, March 30th, 1994, 9 days before his body was discovered, Kurt bought a Remington M11 20-gauge shotgun after a recent burglary. He had previously claimed that he didn't feel safe if he needed to protect himself while in his hometown of Seattle, Washington. Legally, the shotgun is registered to Dylan Carlson, his best friend's name, to avoid any unwanted bad publicity. The same night Kurt bought the shotgun, he took a flight from Seattle to LA. On March 31st, Kurt arrived and checked into Exodus Rehab Center. The staff reported him as being well-mannered and in no way seemingly suicidal. One doctor who visited him even described Cobain as being upbeat. Courtney called the rehab center that day 13 times in an attempt to talk to Kurt, but none of her calls went through to him. However, she later told Tom Grant, the private investigator who she hired 2 days later, that she only made one. The next day, Kurt escaped and flew back to Seattle. On April 2nd, Kurt went to his Lake Washington home and visited some friends crashing there. When Kurt left that morning, it was the last time anyone ever saw him alive. Phone records prove that Courtney talked to Callie, a friend of Kurt's who watched over the house while he was away, 8 times April 2nd, but when Courtney hired Tom Grant the next day, she didn't even let him know that Kurt had been seen here. Odd, right? Because I know that if I hired a PI to find someone and I just so happened to get some very crucial, very exact, very case-solving evidence, I'd let them know. But then again, maybe I'm the crazy one. This timeline proves to us many things, but what we didn't learn is that Kurt was suicidal. Kurt had never been seen as suicidal by any of his friends or family members, so why did suicide even seem like a valid excuse for his death? There's a few theories, but rather than waste time on other people's mere scapegoats, let me show you 3 separate instances proving Kurt's death could not have been a suicide. Reason 1, the toxicology report. When Kurt's body was found, reports showed that his heroin blood level was 1.52 milligrams per liter. In order to reach such a high amount, Kurt would have to inject a minimum of 225 milligrams. Now, for those of you in the room who aren't heroin connoisseurs, this is a lot of heroin. Even for an experienced user like Kurt, this is enough to render the user in a state of temporary paralysis 3 times over. So tell me how a man who, according to basic human physiology, is paralyzed, able to finish tidying up his heroin supplies, place them in a cigar box next to him, sit up, and squeeze the trigger of a gun. He couldn't do it. And this alone is one of the biggest reasons why his death could not have been a suicide. Reason 2, the shotgun and spent shell location. The Remington 20-gauge shell was found on the left side of the room, lying on Kurt's jacket. Literally the last place we'd expect it to be. The shotgun was found lying upside down on his chest with the barrel laid in his left hand. The police theory is as follows. Cobain fired the shotgun right side up. The shotgun then bounced back, hit the floor, flipped upside down, and in the process, lobbed the shell to the left side of the room. This is impossible for multiple reasons. First of all, shotguns do not flip upside down when shot, no matter how large the shell is that they are firing. Unlike handguns, which recoil along a y-axis, long guns get thrown backwards along an x-axis. This theory also completely ignores the phenomenon that is the cadaver spasm. This does many things. The cadaver spasm is an involuntary muscle contraction that occurs only in death. This does many things, but most important to this case is that it makes the hands clench up very tight. This would confirm exactly how the firearm was held because his hands would be clenched around the barrel in the exact angle it was when he pulled the trigger. Furthermore, multiple forensic experts have said that in order for this imaginary scene to take place, Cobain's right wrist would have to be bent at an angle that is anatomically impossible. The only way the shell could have been on the left side of Cobain's body is if it physically hit an obstruction in the room, jarring it off its projected course. The photos released to the public clearly show there is nothing in the room to block the shell, which leaves only one other scenario. He wasn't alone in the room. Reason 3, a forged suicide note. Kurt's suicide note was ripped out of his journal and has been deemed to, or it has two parts, one on top and one on bottom. The top part says how he doesn't really enjoy being a star and wants things to change. The bottom half, or really bottom four lines, are something very stereotypical to what we would expect to see in a suicide note. They read, Frances and Courtney. Please keep going, Courtney, for Frances. For her life would be so much better without me. I love you, I love you. Those four lines come after a closing on the top part of the note saying, Peace, love, empathy, Kurt. This is where the note gets interesting. A few days after Kurt's death, Courtney visited her and Kurt's lawyer, Rosemary Carroll. She arrived with a bag that she carried around everywhere, but when she left, forgot the backpack behind a closed door. Carroll later went to move the bag, but when she picked it up, noticed that some papers had fallen out. She went to put them back, but took a glance at them before doing so. What she saw shocked her. 2 pages of scribbled handwriting, repeating letters or groups of letters seen in the bottom section of the suicide note. Oh my goodness. Rosemary had learned how Courtney had hired Tom Grant to find a missing Kurt, and even though he was already gone, Rosemary faxed him a copy in hopes it would help him in any way possible. Fast forward 20 years, and the handwriting sheets and suicide note have been analyzed by 2 separate forensic experts. Carol Chotchke is one of them. She is a forensic linguistic expert who concluded through a series of tests that whoever wrote the bottom section of the suit wrote the pages in Courtney's backpack did not write the top section. Oh gosh. So if Kurt didn't kill himself, well then who did? Anyone who has ever seen any amount of crime shows knows that a killer needs motive, and who would have one? Well, you guessed it. None other than his wife, Courtney Love. Kurt and Courtney were going through a divorce at the time he died, and if it was finalized, Courtney wouldn't gain many assets from it, simply because Kurt didn't have much in his own name. However, in the unseen event of Kurt's death, 78% of the income from Nirvana would have gone into a trust fund for her and Kurt's daughter. Cobain himself was worth around $4.4 million in 1994. However, the band Nirvana was worth a whopping $151 million or so. This means that Courtney would have had $117.8 million once Kurt died. But wait, we're still buying Nirvana downloads and records and t-shirts, aren't we? In 2013, the band was worth $445 million. Guess who got 78% of the profits? Convincing? Well, I'm not done quite yet. We learned that Courtney Love may have had every motive to want Kurt gone, but how did she get away with the killing? The answer is simple. Sloppy police work and a little help from the media. At the scene of the crime, there really was everything indicating that Kurt took his own life, and the police didn't wait very long before declaring he did so. The media instantly took this and ran with it, getting many of the facts wrong throughout, some even announcing the wrong date of death. The public had no reason not to believe the news stations, and the idea that Kurt Cobain killed himself became the gloomy truth for the world. The Seattle Police Department also waited 30 days before testing the gun for fingerprints. When they got the results, they found the Latin prints were unusable, most likely because it sat in a steamy greenhouse for 3 days and then another month in a crime lab before even being looked at. Since the gun had no usable prints, it was deemed useless to the lab and given back to Cobain's loving wife. She had the gun melted down promptly after receiving it. But this isn't all that she inherited and destroyed. The greenhouse this all went down in was not processed for a very long time, and it was later torn apart on June 5th, 1996. The only hope this case had would be to exhume his body in hopes of finding anything at all pointing to a suspect. The slight problem we're faced with here is that there isn't one to dig up. Courtney was allowed to have the body cremated 6 days after it was discovered, and it's unknown if this is what Kurt wanted, or if this is Courtney just continuing to hide her trail. So with no murder weapon, no crime scene, and not even a body, there really isn't any physical or forensic evidence to convict her on. Kurt was a legend in not only my home state, but the world. He and the members of Nirvana are the ones who pushed the boundaries of what rock and roll was in the 90s, and are the ones we can thank for music from bands like Blink-182, Green Day, and so many others who took inspiration from them. Kurt Cobain deserves more than the legacy of just another Seattle rocker who killed himself. Now that you have a better idea of Kurt Cobain's death, do you see it any different than when you walked into this room? I'll leave it up for you all to decide for yourself. Was it suicide or was it murder?